The Calling of St. Matthew is a masterpiece created by the quite renowned and assumedly troubled Michelangelo Merisi, who is more commonly known as Caravaggio. The painting is gargantuan in size and is the first of three works created by the artist. Each depicts the monumental moments of St. Matthew's life and, more relevantly, Matthew's martyrdom death. All three works were commissioned from the dying will of Cardinal Contarelli. The cardinal purchased the chapel and had grand plans for its decoration. Although Caravaggio had begun to establish himself as a well-known, innovative, and somewhat rebellious of an artist, his first commissioned piece was The Calling of St. Matthew. Furthermore, the skill and technique and triumphs of this commission catapulted Caravaggio into an ironic realm of religious art. The literal and emotional darkness of the painting parallels with the ominous foreboding on the painting's content, and the inclusion of this troubled artist into the high art of several Italian churches and chapels. Caravaggio's calling for the Calling of St. Matthew was clear and concise, with very specific instructions. It is no coincidence that the directional light of the painting corresponds to the natural light in the direction it will hit the painting in real life. It is so strong and intended. Caravaggio executed this piece utilizing tenebrism, which is to say he painted exactly what has been described. The concept of tenebrism also contributed greatly to the essential meaning of his pictures. The painting was to show St. Matthew in a tax collector's office with different things that are needed in such an office. From that table, St. Matthew, dressed as was fitting his profession, rises with the desire to come to our Lord, who, passing through the street with his disciplines, calls him. Caravaggio was not the original artist requested to paint the series. In fact, being overlooked and having pieces rejected was not uncommon for the artists, especially with religious art commissions. Here we actually see one of his works just a few years before The Calling of St. Matthew. It is both a combination of a portrait, but then also he incorporated himself to be a self-portrait of the young, sick Bacchus. His preceding works were scandalous to many and often featured gore or depictions of great classical tales and figures, but with brutal, violent truths. His David and Goliath, which was painted just 18 months before, really epitomizes Caravaggio's style. The reimagination of the scene shows exactly how Caravaggio's take on art would often provide a new perspective or insight into classical scenes we've seen so many variations of. The shock factor certainly was appealing during this time, but it was his use of realistic imagery and simultaneously darkening a story that made Caravaggio a main figure of the Baroque period. To me, the creator of the painting must have been troubled. The Calling of St. Matthew was and still is a masterpiece of impeccable use of negative space, and the darkness that surrounds the scene seemed to have surrounded Caravaggio himself. He followed this commissioned work with petty crimes like slander and mischief. Rather than rising to a notoriety of greatness, Caravaggio found himself in the streets, involved in gruesome fights, and in examining the painting, as enjoyable as it is to look at, there is a clear melancholic sadness that surrounds the figure, which we will see here soon. Towering at roughly 11 feet by 11 feet, we see most of the oil color variations through the center of the painting. It is not just the content of the painting or how it came to be created. Caravaggio does not just show us a tax collector's office, he brings us inside a very believable tax collector's office in Rome in 1599. But it is just a glimpse. The use of shadow and the stark directional lighting leave the viewer with an almost empty sensation. Each figure is clearly lit and seems to be playing an integral role in the scene. Although completely combined, they only inhabit about a third of the painting's space. What stands out most to me in this painting is the younger gentleman's expression that is so clear and expressive. Or maybe it's the expression of the alleged Levi and his astonishment. Regardless, everyone seems to work harmoniously, like a choreographed pose, to retell this monumental moment. And in fact, when he painted this picture, he actually used some peers and friends who posed for him to create this painting. I'd argue that this is Caravaggio's element of a self-portrait as well. During this time, Caravaggio was up and coming and beginning to rub shoulders with the right people in the art and commissioned art world. His work prior to this painting, Lute Player, in St. Petersburg, reflected his exposure to the artistic tastes of Del Monte, his protector of swords, and his cultured circle. The camaraderie of artists and their social circles was well documented, especially after this acclaimed piece debuted. There is still this overall brotherly-like mood that is apparent between the secondary characters of the painting. The figures depicted each seem to have a human and present-day quality about them. In addition, the clothing we see was contemporary at the time. When we juxtapose these figures with Jesus Christ, there's a clear dissonance in dress and ultimately powerful presence in this room. Without knowing the story, we know that this is the moment before our protagonist will cross the threshold. He will be joining the powerful figure at the other end of the painting, whose most powerful detail is a cleverly simplified halo that does not encompass his entire head, but rather peeks out from the darkness as if the light is hitting it just right. That it shines in such a dark space empowers it even more, and thus adds to the genius use of shadow in the painting. The calling is illustrated through the stark and direct lighting implemented on and through the painting. Negative space is a concept that we see much more often in modern art. Specifically, a lot of today's top designers of high-end homes and architects' greatest artistic feats will often feature perfectly placed objects in a seemingly disproportionately large space. But it doesn't take long for a viewer of this painting to see that negative space is masterfully used here by Caravaggio, with most of the painting being this very dark, deep brown or black color. The scale value is incredible, as the black of this painting does not just feel empty or lacking, but rather full and very telling. For me personally, it puts a feeling of darkness around the scene. It makes the painting a memory as opposed to a depiction. The solemn darkness surrounding the scene forebodes what ultimately happens to this central figure.